Good evening, and thank you so much for coming to our public meeting. The task force has been meeting since March of this year, 10 months when I added it all up, and we're very pleased that you're here to hear the results of our work. My name is Mel Marsh. I'm the external facilitator that was hired to keep things on track. So I've been intimately involved with the process and the work of the process, but I have not been involved with the content of the recommendations. That was done solely by the task force members who are Yellow Springs residents. So the things we're going to talk about tonight, I don't want to get that too close to me, I'm blasting. What we did, the process we went through for the past 10 months to work on this, what we learned from that, what our recommendations are to the board as of now. We're going to talk briefly about funding options, although that was not our charge to be in charge of how we go about funding this, but we do want to give you some information that we learned about tax levies and things like that. And then we want to hear from you. We've got an opportunity to capture your thoughts and ideas near the end of the presentation, because we want to hear if you're thinking we're on the right track, what questions you have, and then we'll talk about next steps. All right, what we did over the past 10 months, again, I'm going to remind those latecomers, we have handouts at the back table, and we also have an opportunity for you to sign in so we know who came to visit us tonight. We were given a charge as a task force, and this is our understanding of what we needed to do as that task force. Figure out what's working and what's not in the different school buildings. Develop a clear list of what should be addressed and improved. And I want to give you a heads up right now. One of the things we did differently than the proposal in 2018 is we're not recommending that we have a wholesale replacement. We really ended up focusing on, let's keep these buildings and let's focus on fixing the most important problems that are going on within these buildings. We needed to prioritize those improvements. We need to share with you, the community, and we're also videotaping this so that it can be available to people who weren't able to participate this evening. Report to the board, make our recommendations formally to the board of the school. And I want to tell you, we were not charged with figuring out how to pay for this, nor were we charged with figuring out the actual design of how to fix the things that we've identified. This is not our area of expertise, and it is not something that can be done in a part-time basis in the evenings every couple of weeks. So the task force composition is made up of community members. We had people who were very much in favor of the 2018 levy, and we had people who were not in favor of the 2018 levy. We have people who spend their days in the buildings, students, faculty, and staff. And we also had a building construction expert and then two representatives from the school district, Superintendent Holden and TJ Turner. This is a list of the task force members, and I'll just let you take a moment to read them. And I'm going to ask the task force members who are present here to please stand up. Yeah. They actually have earned that round of applause. They have worked very, very hard. What we did, we've been meeting since March of this year, and as I said, it's been 10 months when I added that up. We visited the schools early on. I had never been in the school. Some of the people hadn't been in the schools for some time. We wanted to make a grand tour of both schools so we had a good understanding of what's going on in the schools. We conducted focus groups with the faculty and students in both schools to get their perspective of what it's like to be in the schools all day, every day. We surveyed the community. We had a community survey that was both online, and we had hard copies spread out in various places throughout the community. We had 156 responses, and those responses were very, very, very informative for us. We developed some guiding principles as we were going through this. It's actually one of the challenges we had is it's a very amorphous task. Figure out what's wrong with the school buildings. How do we figure that out? How do we decide what's important and so on? So one of the things we said was we need guiding principles to help us as we're doing our decision making and our discussions. We learned about tax levies. None of us were experts in tax levies. None of us were experts in how school districts are funded. I can tell you we're still not experts, but we are more informed than we were before. And that was very helpful to us in understanding just what are we recommending and what is the impact of our recommendations. And we talked to the school board to say, what do you think is coming down the pike? What do you think is going to be needed in the Yellow Springs schools, but also what do you think is happening in the future of education? We listened to an engineering group who had been hired to do a physical assessment of both schools, and we listened to their recommendations of what they thought was wrong and what they thought needed to be addressed. We asked Mike Ruchley, who is the architect who designed the improvements to the schools that were part of the 2018 levy. We asked him to present on that design so we could understand what was in that design. And we also invited a community member, Mr. David, to come in and give us some alternative ideas on how things might be addressed if we're talking about school improvements. We used the Fanning Howey report as kind of a framework for our conversations. Again, saying fix the schools is really very amorphous, but the Fanning Howey report gave the framework of discussion about building envelope, about the plumbing, the heating, and so on. So it gave us tools to use as we're having our conversation, so it's not just a great big school, but it's piece parts of the school. And then in addition to that, we also used the information from the principals, from the faculty, and the student focus groups to give us additional topics to include in our discussions. We went back to the schools a second time because we had learned enough now that when we went back through the schools, we saw things differently. And it gave us a chance to really confirm our understanding and to get some new ideas, in fact. Then we needed to start working through our way through the prioritization. So I gave all the task force members a survey to ask them to rank everything as high, medium, or low. This gave us the opportunity to start with some idea of what people thought was most important, as well as some idea of about what people thought was less important. It wasn't what we ended up with, but it at least helped us start the conversations. And then we had discussion after discussion after discussion to talk about what really was the highest priority and what was lesser priority. And we did spend a lot of time listening to each other and understanding concerns and trying to figure out finally, yep, this is what we agree is the most important thing for us to discuss. The guiding principles that I mentioned, we said the health, safety, and security of the students is very, very important. So anything that addresses health, safety, and security is going to be important for us. Maintenance, we noticed that there had been a lack of maintenance, and so we wanted to say we really need to have maintenance present going forward. We heard from the survey results that affordability was incredibly important to the residents of Yellow Springs. It was a tax levy that caused you to invest additional funds into the school district, and affordability just came through so loud and clear. We also wanted to be thinking about 21st century skills and 21st century learning. And that includes things like projects, that includes things like independent work, teamwork, computers, technology. So a lot of things we want to make sure when the students graduate Yellow Springs High School, they are really prepared for the 21st century. And we wanted to think about what we called as a kind of a guiding term as Yellow Springs values. Environmental sustainability came out pretty loud and clear through the survey results. Concern with the waste, should we tear down the old buildings? So we listened to you, we heard it, and we said there are a number of things that fit into this category called Yellow Springs value that we need to be considering as well. What we learned. As I said, that survey was very, very helpful to us to understand the perspective of the community. The top positive, the top strength that people identified, and there were 39 people who said this, they loved the design. And there's a sample quote here. The design was very progressive. It was state-of-the-art, heating, ventilation, air conditioning. The horrible tower is gone. 3 large pods south-facing and open to the outdoors. A revamped kitchen and access, revamped traffic pattern and secure entry. The cinder block prison-like atmosphere would have been transformed. On the other hand, we had 91 people who said affordability was the most important thing and the design was much too expensive. So a sample comment, way too much money asked for a new school when the village is not growing, so we'll have fewer kids in the future. We heard some additional concerns in the levy results, one being that community members felt a little bit turned off by what they perceived as scare tactics by the school board, so they didn't like being frightened that way. There was a perception that the school board did not communicate effectively or listen effectively. On the other hand, I heard the survey results included other people who said the school board did an outstanding job with communications. So we did have both perspectives. We had slightly more people saying the communications were not as effective as we had people saying they were effective. People wanted renovation rather than a new build because they didn't want to have all of the waste of tearing down an old building and putting it someplace in a landfill. We had no design for Mills Lawn. People said for $18 million and only one school, we know there's going to be another levy in the future because Mills Lawn needs help too. Design was too grandiose, where the person on the previous page said, I love the design, I love the openness, the open to the south. Other people said it was just too grandiose for Yellow Springs, not something we really want to pay for. Design for project-based learning. People were concerned that project-based learning might be a sort of a term of the month kind of thing, and if we design specifically for that and it goes away in the future, have we wasted our money? And a lot of concern about lack of maintenance, and the task force members agree there has been a lack of maintenance at the Yellow Springs schools for some time. We did discover that the Yellow Springs residents are passionate about their schools, so thank you for that passion and interest. Additional learnings, we did discover that the community values the schools, believes it contributes to the identity as a village, but also the vitality of the village by having all those young people who are here, who are part of the community. We did also learn there are absolutely real problems that must be addressed. The buildings are not in any danger of falling down. If you look at this thing, it is built out of brick and it's not going anywhere. But that doesn't mean there aren't problems with things like the technology, with the plumbing, with the windows that are energy inefficient and so on. We heard loud and clear, affordability and environmental sustainability is very, very important for the residents of Yellow Springs. And we agree that maintenance has been underfunded. It's been inadequate, and it's been very reactionary. Instead of having a forward-looking plan saying, here's all the things we're going to be doing this year, and then next year and the year after, it's been a crisis comes up, that's where attention goes. A crisis comes up, that's where attention goes. We had total agreement from everybody we spoke to that the modular classrooms must be replaced as classrooms. And we're not saying we have to tear them down. They could be used for storage, but we're just saying they are not effective as classrooms for our students. And modern security needs are not being met. I will also say Superintendent Holden has already begun to address that by adding some additional cameras and some additional security features, and it plans to continue doing that. Both schools are very energy inefficient. They have electrical lights that are not efficient. They have windows that leak. They have walls that leak. Water comes in. Air comes in. We heard from the maintenance person that here in Mills Lawn, for example, the last classrooms down at the end of that first hall tend to be pretty cold in winter because it leaks, and they're too far away from the furnace to have hot air that lasts all the way down to there. So we ended up summarizing the classroom conditions are not always conducive to learning or to student health. Both schools lack reliable, sufficient electrical service. They don't have enough electrical service for the modern technology that's being used, with everybody having Chromebooks and PCs and so on. We have power disruptions where the power just fails. Both schools lack reliable, sufficient, relevant technology. And again, it's hard to keep up with these things. We're at capacity in some things. The technology has been impacted by the fact that the power has failed occasionally, so it's a challenge. And plumbing has problems. The plumbing is not efficient. We have signs in some of the restrooms saying double flush, please. We have some students who say, I will not use the restrooms. We have just, it's not a pretty picture. Both schools have inadequate kitchens and cafeterias. That is the cafeteria, or the kitchen right across the way. You are in the cafeteria for Mills Lawn School. The serving line is that hallway out there. So when the students are trying to get their lunches, that hallway is pretty much impacted. Students complained pretty loudly to me in the focus groups about the fact that it just takes forever to get through the serving lines. The principal here has decided that this is, in addition to the cafeteria, this is also the gym for PE. So in order to keep the gym available for PE, we now have some of the students eating in their classrooms at lunchtime, so they're not taking up quite as much space in here. So it's just not an effective thing. The same thing happens at the high school. And students at both schools said this is not functional. We also heard people complaining about open enrollment, so we wanted to clarify that it seems as though the benefits of open enrollment are not clear to all. And a couple of points I want to make about that. We need critical mass to have some of the advanced classes. If we're going to have AP classes, if we're going to have a variety of foreign languages, we need to have critical mass of students to be able to do that. We get more state funding for the out-of-district students than we do for in-district students. So it's a huge help for the overall operational budget. Important for us to know. It does bring a diverse perspective to our Yellow Springs students. I hope nobody's going to be offended if I say there is a real, honest-to-goodness Yellow Springs bubble. And when we have students from outside the Yellow Springs bubble, they can come in and ask questions differently and bring different perspectives to it, and that's good. And finally, the district asked me to make sure you understand we don't add classrooms for open enrollment. Rather, we fill classes with open enrollment students. And one task force member summarized it this way: our students and our teachers deserve better. Beautiful, functioning schools are central to the life and vitality of our village. Our children deserve to spend 7 hours per day, 5 days a week, in a facility that tells them they are valued. So our recommendations. Our overall approach, as I mentioned earlier, we realized early on with the affordability issue being so central, so top of mind to the residents of Yellow Springs, we could not recommend tearing down buildings and replacing them. So our overall approach has been, how do we work within the existing buildings and try to make them better for our students and our faculty? They do represent the best spirit of compromise. We had members on the task force who liked the new design, who wanted to have beautiful, modern buildings for our students, and we had members on the task force who really wanted to be as frugal as it was possible to be. So our conversations as we were going through the prioritization process really resulted in people saying, okay, I give on that, okay, I give on that, so that we ended up with recommendations that every member of the task force could support. And I will say, we did stick to all 5 of the guiding principles, but I will admit that the affordability principle really trumped just about everything else, and the health and safety principle as well. We wanted to make sure our students are safe, but we wanted to provide the most cost-effective project for residents of Yellow Springs. So there's a handout for you. On the first page, it says at the very top, highest priority improvements, and then there's a table that is labeled district-wide, just so you know you're on the right page. Okay. Looking at the district-wide, we felt that as an entire district, we strongly recommend that they need to significantly increase the funding and resources overall for maintenance. And we want that maintenance to be much more proactive and much more looking at how do we stay ahead of the maintenance problems rather than just reacting to crises as they happen. Then we have a series of recommendations. I need both my hands, that really applied to both schools, and that's the next section. And I want to emphasize within this section, these are not listed in any priority sequence. They are listed simply as all of these are the highest priority. All of these are the ones we feel are essential for the school district to address. Replace the modular classrooms with a new classroom space that is conducive to learning for the students, that is actually safe for them to enter and exit. I don't know if you've seen the modular outside here, but it's kind of scary walking into it. So replacing the modular classrooms is very, very important. We want to continue the security improvements that Superintendent Holden has already started. So taking a look at things like making sure all the doors are secured, we have cameras. We want to have a better front entrance at the high school, because right now it's pretty open. You walk in and you have complete access to the entire high school. We want to add an entry vestibule here at Mills Lawn. There's better control here at Mills Lawn, but we still want to have a little bit a stopping point for guests coming in and a clearer point for them to stop coming in. Hazardous materials, we do have some materials in the building that have things like asbestos in it. Right now it is completely contained. If we do any renovations that cause those hazardous materials to be released into the atmosphere, we will address them. If we don't do anything that causes them to be released into the atmosphere, they will remain as they are. Plumbing, as I mentioned, we have students who refuse to use the restrooms. We have signs up saying double flush, again, not so energy efficient. We have leaks. We have just problems with the plumbing. We are not saying how to fix that plumbing. We are not saying everything that's wrong with the plumbing. We are simply saying we need to have functional plumbing in both buildings. Building envelope, the one that leaks water, air, insects, animals. I heard from the students at the high school in particular, they were talking about all the insects that come in. I heard from the faculty about the bats that come in, and it just doesn't sound like a pleasant environment. In addition to the water and the air that makes the energy completely inefficient and damages the building. Again, leading to heating and cooling. We'd like to have functional heating and cooling. As I mentioned, in Mills Lawn, down at the far end, that classroom stays pretty darn cold. We had students and faculty report to us that in some classrooms in the summer, the air conditioning is so high that you have to open the windows to let warm air in. Some classrooms in the winter, the heating is so high you have to open windows to let the cool air in. Depending on where you are in some of the classrooms, you might be cold because you're right underneath the vent, but in a different part of the same classroom, you might be overheated because you're not getting any of the airflow. So it's just what we have right now is not efficient. It's not effective, and we need to have efficient and effective heating and cooling. The cafeteria, as I mentioned, in both schools, don't have sufficient room in here. It's taking up the gym. Don't have sufficient room at Mills or at the middle school and the high school. Both schools have the serving line right in a hallway, so it impacts the ability for people to get through. The kitchens only have the ability to reheat food for the most part, and we as the Yellow Springs community do have a desire for fresh foods. We'd like to have better quality kitchens so we can serve better quality food to the students. Looking at both the reliable power and the reliable technology, we have just a lot of old stuff here. It was actually kind of frightening for us when we went down in the basement of the high school to look at all the different power boxes down there and try to make sense out of what was going on. So we need to have sufficient reliable power so that when the students plug things in, they keep functioning. Those were all of the high priority items. On the back side of the page, and I'm not going to spend time going through all of those, but on the back side of the page, we have specific recommendations for the middle school and the high school, and then for Mills Lawn School. They addressed much the same thing, things like improved accessibility, site drainage. We had a long conversation about site drainage where when we're talking about the building envelope, we are talking about water that leaks directly into the building, but we have other parts of the site where we have flooding, we have puddles that stay and last a long time. That's what we're talking about in the site drainage that is separate from the building envelope. Severe weather shelter, what we have today works. It's perhaps not optimum, but it does work, so it does meet our standard of safety. We have some non-functional classrooms, especially at the high school. And here's an example of where I said 21st century learning lost out a little bit to affordability and health and safety. So if there is more funding available, I sincerely hope that the school district does invest in this area. And then some other specific things in there. But we spent time trying to say what is the most important, what are the things that we think are essential for the future of the students and to make the students feel safe, secure, and able to learn. Now, I mentioned we want to talk to you about funding options, and one of our big challenges is that we have absolutely no idea how much money what we've recommended will cost. We absolutely have no idea. And that is because we have identified things on there such as, let's get reliable heating, reliable, efficient, and effective heating and air conditioning. Until somebody comes and does a complete assessment on our heating and air conditioning and comes up with some alternatives of how to address it, we won't know how much that costs. We've said we need to have plumbing that works, that has bathrooms where people aren't afraid to go into them. Until we have somebody come in and do a thorough assessment and find out just exactly what is contributing to all those problems, we won't know how much that's going to cost. So unfortunately, we're not able to come here and say, this is a $2,000 or $2 million package or a $5 million package or a $10 million package. We just don't know. And we won't know until the school board goes out and actually asks for bids. But we do have some recommendations. One of the things we learned when we were doing our study of levies, tax levies, and how school districts are funded, there is something called a permanent improvement levy. and that is the levy that funds the maintenance items, other than operational kinds of things. Actually funds the maintenance items and funds things like new school buses. That levy currently generates just under $150,000 a year. So it's not generating very much money. And these are two schools with, in some cases, very, very old buildings. It just requires more. So we are making a very specific recommendation here because this one we understood. We don't know how much money you should include in the permanent improvement, but we are saying to the school board, please increase the permanent improvement levy to fund the appropriate maintenance for school buildings of this size and this age. And we had the whole long list of high priority improvements, from the modular to the plumbing to the technology. Here's where there are options that can be done. We can do it via taxpayer funding, which is the typical way that school districts do improve their new buildings and major renovations. The first one is you can take out a bond, and this is not equal, but if you think of a bond as similar in concept to a mortgage, when we buy houses, we typically take out a mortgage. We pay on that mortgage for anywhere from 15 to 30 years. That's what a bond is. The bond gives you the money up front, and then the school district pays it back over some period of time until it is fully paid back. Just as with our mortgage, we have interest on a bond. So one of the challenges with a bond, it gives you the benefit of all the money up front, but you are paying interest. That levy, that bond can be paid back with either a property tax or an income tax, or both. Another way to consider it is thinking about paying as you go. So a way to do this, in addition to increasing the permanent improvement levy to support long-term maintenance, you can increase the permanent improvement levy pretty heftily, and it would need to be pretty heftily in order to generate multiple millions of dollars to be able to address the recommendations we have for improvement. That's a pay-as-you-go. There would be no interest incurred in that one. And a third alternative is to have a combination of both, where we have some money up front, paying perhaps less interest, and then some pay-as-you-go with improvements made over time. One person mentioned to me early on there was concern about potentially the school district selling its assets. Well, that is another way to fund it. If the community is unable to fund the improvements through tax levies, whichever kind of tax levy, and yet we as a task force are saying these are critically important improvements, they have to figure out some way to fund it, and that is one way to go. I will also tell you Superintendent Holden is looking at things like grants for some of the smaller items, so she's looking at ways to try to get kitchen equipment in here that would be better than we have. So there are some other alternatives, but you're not going to fundraise or grant your way to the major improvements that we've talked about overall. Superintendent Holden told us that the school district is going to be holding some information sessions for the community probably after the first of the year to give people an understanding of how school districts are funded and the challenges within those school district funding. I will tell you, I grew up in California, and I've been here 40 years, but I recall reading about school districts in Ohio because they were closing back when I first moved here. They were closing, and it's like, that never happened in California. Of course, now it's happening in California too, but somehow what we're doing for funding schools is very, very challenging and very, very hard for the community to bear. So we would like to hear from you at this point in time. We're going to have our two scribes come up. And we have microphones here. Let's see, our spotters are Abby and Susan? No, Abby and, yeah. And before I want to give a couple of guiding points here. The first one is we do want to hear from as many as possible, so we're asking you to keep each comment to about a minute, and we have a timekeeper. The second one is if you have a question that's easy to answer, we'll go ahead and answer it tonight, but if it's going to be kind of complex, we might just record it and then report back to you. We're putting all this information on a web page on the district site, so we'll be able to put those answers on that page. And then the third thing I'd like to recommend is I want to remind you that we actually can't change the past. So, right? So I'd rather not spend time talking about what went wrong in the past, because the past is the past. We would love to hear your ideas about how we can make things better in the future, your questions about the future, your recommendations, and so on. And again, your concerns about this set of recommendations, because this set of recommendations is oriented to the future. So with that, you first.
Is it on? Is it on?
Yeah, it's true. I'm Celia Diamond. I'm a resident of Yellow Springs. I have 3 grandchildren in the schools, and I'm very concerned about their environment in the schools. I'm not excited about the recommendations, but I approve of them all. It's bringing us up to speed, and I want it badly, but it's not exciting. Question. Given that student safety is one of your first priorities, why is it that severe weather shelter and fire protection are not among your major recommendations? We had a tornado.
I think that one fits in the quickie, and the quickie is Principal Haggard, when we asked him how important it was to have the fire protection, he said there had been 1 student death from a fire in 50 years across the nation. Am I remembering that statistic correctly?
I was just comparing school safety from an active shooter compared to fire, so I don't have specific data.
In any case, the protections that we have in place with the fire drills and the extra fire drills that we have, he felt was sufficient. We don't currently have we don't have a giant place where all the students can go, but again, what is happening in both schools is working today.
You mean about the severe weather?
For the severe weather, yeah.
It says here that it's insufficient. That we can't hear.
I'm sorry, I'm taking up more than a minute, but it says that in the Mills Lawn School, we do not have a shelter. We do not have a shelter able to withstand 250 miles per hour winds, and so how can it be enough?
And now I'm going to say, we're going to put that we're going to ask experts and provide you a written response. Thank you for the question.
I hear safety is paramount and maintenance hasn't been done, and environmental sustainability is important. Affordability is one of those things, and death is bad too. So those are 4 vague statements. It'd be nice to get a little bit more specific definition of maintenance needs and associated costs possibly, even if it's just general areas. And I think safety is important clearly, but at the same time, there's some overblown concerns related to that as well. And there's some fear-mongering that goes along with it. I've been tutoring and working in the schools for many years, and it doesn't feel like a prison to me, so calling it a cinder block prison, that makes it a safe place for wins, though, so you gotta pick one. And what's the rough value of the assets? Let's say we sold every single one of them and built all high-rises on Mills Lawn and people rioted in the streets. How much money would we get out of that? $5, $5 million, $50 million? It seems to me that it wouldn't be enough to fund all this stuff. So considering selling all the assets as a way to fund all the stuff doesn't seem to be a good idea. Not that anybody's suggesting that. I'd like some quantification and definition of some of these things to be able to get a better understanding of what that actually means.
Great, thank you.
Hi, my name is Dorothy Buki. My daughter attends this school. She's in kindergarten, so I'm at the beginning of our life in this school here. And I wanted to thank all of you that worked on this. I've got a lot of answers from this in your presentation, and I'm very thankful for the creative thinking that has been put in it. I really am. In terms of the safety, to answer your question, the first thing that came to my mind was active shooter. And it's on my mind because my daughter is in the first classroom that you get to when you enter a building. And I have to tell you, I got some panic attacks at the beginning of the school year, thinking that if it was an active shooter, they would get into my daughter's room first. And I say that because I grew up in an era where I didn't have to worry about that. Also, I grew up in France where we don't have a gun problem. So now we have to cope with this. So in terms of the inclement weather, I understand why you prioritize this last compared to active shooter drills. I am now actually, I'm getting to the point that David Turner is how much does all of this cost? And I know that you said this will be the next step, is how do we put a number on that? In terms of your solutions that you listed at the end, I wanted kind of all of it. I wanted a combination of a mortgage, a combination of increasing the maintenance funds, and also a combination of selling some assets that we're underusing right now. That was something that I wanted to know more about. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Carmen Milano, and I would like to know a little more about the funding option that's the pay-as-you-go and doesn't include interest. Is that a series of levies, or how does that work? That's what I'm curious.
I think it's going to be short. It would be a significant increase in permanent improvement, and instead of being able to make all of the improvements at one time, you'd make a couple year one, a couple year two, a couple year three, a couple year four, as the money came in.
But how and when are we collecting that money?
It would be increasing that permanent improvement levy, which comes in every single year.
Every single year. Thank you.
I hope that was clear.
I would just like to say, I'm Dawn Cooksey, and my daughter Leila attends here. And years ago, I was a school social worker here. But I am glad that Mills Lawn is going to stay here, as opposed to the ideas I had heard about, selling this part of the land and moving the school out, because I know that they do field trips where they can just walk to town. And my daughter was talking about one of those today, that they walk to the post office, they walk to the library, and those just wouldn't happen because they wouldn't get a bus to do that. Those little small field trips. And I just really like that it's going to stay in the community center. I think that's important. So.
How's that? I'm Carol Young. I know there's a lot of discussion about selling assets. Can I trust that would come, can we trust that would come to the community for comment before that was pursued? Because I know this land is owned by the school board. So could we trust that there would be community involvement?
Yes.
Okay. I also do want to thank the task force that did this. My husband and I went to some of the meetings, and everybody was working really hard. And we toured some of the schools, and there clearly are problems. When there's snow coming in and things like that. So I appreciate everything the board has done. So that's my comment.
Hi, I'm Dale Hoteling. I want to echo that too. I appreciate the work that everybody did here. It seems very clear, thought out. I think there's good opportunity for discussion. But my main concern about the other building, the high school and McKinney building, is the area that is the McKinney school that seems like it's just stuck on. I think it's affectionately referred to as the shoebox, and it seems like it's inadequate, much more so than I think it was referred to as the horrible tower, the 3 floors, which I don't find horrible. I think it has some use, and it maybe isn't perfect, but has some nice classrooms there and seems to function. But as far as the other building goes, really, just from my observation, it seems like the McKinney area needs a lot more attention than maybe even this school or the other if you're prioritizing the 3 spaces.
So that's another quickie, and I can answer that one. That McKinney school is the modular that we're referring to at the middle school, high school. So it is the modular that we are strongly recommending must be replaced as classroom space. Yeah, glad you agree. One up here, Abby.
Hi, I'm Angela Brittlinger. Thank you so much for your work. I can see that you worked and thought through everything. My children are no longer in the school, so in a sense I don't care. But of course I do care, that's why I'm here. And it's really, we have to continue to think about how this is not just about our own children, this is about the people who are going to run this world. So we have to think very carefully I was fortunate to visit Walnut Hills last week, and the security setup at Walnut Hills is very modern and very fantastic, and I was super impressed. So maybe if anybody hasn't visited there. My question is actually very simple, which is these improvements are great and they're going to cost more than tearing down 2 schools and building new schools, I think. And so if that is the case, if it turns out to be more expensive to do these repairs, do you have a plan or a thought about how to address this landfill concern that you've identified in the community?
I'm going to say we'll put that one on the table to answer and get back to you.
Thank you.
Over here.
Hi, David Roach. I live here in the village, and I'd just like to make a comment about selling off assets. It's very easy to sell something off. It's very hard to get it back again. So you sell it off, and then someone says, hey, now we've got enough money, maybe someone donates money to build an auditorium or something. Then where do you go and build it? The land's gone. Secondly, the land, the real money the school's going to get is the selling price. If you do the math on it, it really doesn't, it barely touches the cost of what needs to be done. And you've got rid of it. And yes, there will be houses there, but the taxes that all those houses pay, the school only gets a tiny percentage of that. So at the end of the day, you've given away a huge asset to get very little back again. It really should be a last-ditch effort. That, I mean, if we can't make a mortgage payment or something in 10 years' time or 5 years' time, maybe something had to be sold off. But I don't think we should start selling to make the repairs.
Thank you, and I think you're right.
Good evening, folks. Thank you for coming. I do not have a question, but I do have a comment, so I want to put some things to rest. There is currently no plan to sell assets. So I'm going to repeat now what I've said in the past. The board has a moral and ethical responsibility to provide adequate educational facilities for our children. If it is the appetite of the community to not fund, whether it's an improved permanent improvement levy, by the way, which is a tax. So when we talk about increasing the permanent improvement levy, that is a tax. So if there's no appetite to increase that or to support a bond issue, they do have to do something. And there are not many options left for schools other than that. So there's no plan right now to do that. However, as everyone knows, there was an assessment done of the land that the district owns. So I just want to maybe assure folks, but also tell you kind of what I've said in the past and what I will continue to say about that.
Other questions?
Hi, I'm Kirk Meekin. I have a daughter in 7th grade at middle school, and my daughter graduated last spring. And you said here, all right, you said here the school district has a significantly increased funding for maintenance. You're talking about at least how much a year?
We are not experts, and that's going to be something the school board will assess. We're just saying that the less than $150,000 a year is significantly inadequate. I wish I could be more precise, but I can't.
Okay. And for teachers at Mills Lawn and the high school, do any of them have anything on these lists as number one to them?
Let's ask Desiree.
So I'm a teacher that was on the committee, and we had 2 students on the committee as well, and we met with teachers and got their input, and I think most teachers concur. I mean, of course, we all love the idea of a new building, but I think first and foremost, we wanted to replace the shoebox at McKinney Middle School and the trailer outside here at Mills Lawn. We talk about the bathrooms a lot, problems with those, and we talk about heat and air conditioning and the fact that the buildings, it rains inside and bats come in and bugs come in, and so all of those kinds of things. And of course, security is also a number one concern of teachers. And then last but not least is the technology and the electricity that goes with that. Typically in my room, I teach a course called AP Seminar, and we only have 2 electrical outlets, so I have a big, I forget what you call those things, but you plug it in and then it has numerous outlets on it, and that goes into the center of the room, and computers are all plugged into the center of the room. It looks like a big spider in there. So the technology, at least, you know, I mean, these buildings were built before computers were invented, so we're not set up for contemporary needs. So I would say that and I guess I should also mention the kitchen aspect. That's a real problem. Students, we have a half hour for lunch, and sometimes you don't get your lunch until 25 minutes after you get downstairs to get your lunch. You wait in line that long. So all of these, I would say, are teacher and student priorities, and people had plenty of time and opportunity to have input, teachers and students, on that. So yes, other short of not getting brand new buildings, these would be our priorities, yes.
Thank you very much for asking that question.
I'm David Goodman, and I have a question as to what the possibility is for federal grant money for something like education like this. And I haven't heard anything this evening. I mean, has that been looked into, or is that part of it?
I'm looking at Terry. I don't believe there is federal grant money for school buildings.
There is not federal grant money for school buildings. There is state money, and it's a little bit of a complicated process. But there is state money based upon, and it's based upon student demographics and the property value assessment of a community.
And security too? There's nothing?
There are some low-level security grants. I mean, we've had maybe 2 come across my desk so far this year. One is a 3-to-1 match for a maximum of $40,000, and one was about $4,000. So none of these are high-dollar grants, aside from the state program for co-funding school facilities.
And David's next door neighbor.
The task force may have assessed like other communities of the same size, and when they rebuild the school, what is the result and how does it affect the community?
We did not do that.
That would probably be a good way to see maybe what other communities have done and how it ended up affecting. Did it work? Did it not work?
Beautiful recommendation. We'll put that down for the school board to consider.
Could I ask you to clarify, regional or renovate or
Was your recommendation about school districts that had renovated or rebuilt completely?
All just assessing different.
What other school districts have done and what the impact was?
Yeah, especially communities of the same size, closer to the size, I guess.
Thank you. Other questions?
Hi, my name is Matthew Kirk. I have a first grader at Mills Lawn. So I guess one question I had in light of the many needs that the buildings have, whether for maintenance or replacement, if one of the scenarios we're looking at is how open enrollment impacts what our facility needs are. I know I've heard people mention the need to replace the shoebox and other things, and you know, if we have student enrollment that is 25 or 30% beyond what is actually required by the district, are we pursuing avenues to repurpose existing space to replace potentially the shoebox, is I guess kind of what I'm getting at, versus just saying we have to keep the exact same footprint we have now, like we have a mobile trailer now, like so we need to replace that mobile trailer with a new mobile trailer.
We simply said we have to replace that current educational space with new educational space. Whether that, we're not saying how, we're not saying where, we're just saying that educational space is inadequate for the students today.
Hi, I'm Parker Buckley. Just two things. One, if there has been an assessment made of real estate holdings, what revenue they might generate if sold. It'd be nice to know, what those numbers are, if it's accessible, if it's been done in the past. We hear about it, we don't have any details.
There was a presentation made to the school board back in about April, I think it was, and that is public information. So,
Okay, we'll try to find that.
and we can put that.
Okay, it's on the website, great. Okay, the other thing is, I wonder, the village values the school system, and everyone you talk to really wants strong schools in Yellow Springs, and we value the way of life that we have here in Yellow Springs. And I wonder if enough is being done to try to reach the broader community. We've heard in the past that affordable housing is going to solve all of the problems, but affordable housing could also draw more people here who look like me, who are retired and are not contributing to the tax base the way we really need. So, to support the schools and to support other things we want to do. So I just wonder if we're having this discussion here about the schools, and then there's another discussion about how we might use the real estate around Yellow Springs, and the council has their challenges. So I don't know if there's a way to open up this discussion, be more inclusive. I know this is open to the public, and you've invited everyone to be here, but I just wonder if enough is being done in an integrated way in the village.
And whether enough is being done, I can't say, but I will say that Superintendent Holden is planning to meet with Village Council and with the Chamber of Commerce about the plans for the school facilities going forward. Because you're right, the health of the community impacts the health of the schools. Absolutely.
That's an excellent question, and I do have an answer.
It's an excellent question, and there is an answer, but it does not fall into the short answer. So I want to make sure that we capture that, because that's an excellent point that you make.
And Mel, we're planning to meet with smaller groups too.
We are planning to meet with smaller groups. Two of those groups are the Chamber and the Village Council, but we are looking at trying to reach out more widely to make sure, not just have the public meeting, but have more targeted meetings. Yes.
Hi, my name is Lisa Krieger. I have 2 grandchildren in the school district, and I'm a member of the Village Council, just re-elected.
Thank you.
And I believe that the most important thing that we can do is collaborate across the different critical stakeholders in the community. And to me, that includes the school board, the Village Council, Antioch College, the Community Foundation. I mean, I think that I don't want to leave anyone out, but I think those are important entities. We all have assets of different sorts, and we're very fortunate that we have a small community, and in a small community, we have the opportunity to make a difference. But also in a small community, we're all reaching into the same pockets, right? It's a fixed set of assets. So I'm very encouraged under this administration and under this current council that we all have an opportunity to really collaborate. And I affirm your concern. I am a supporter of affordable housing, but I think the definition of affordable housing has a range. I mean, I need to be able to afford to live. I think all of us want to afford to live here and to attract young families who can live here. So I think that's something we need to look at and define. So thank you for that question. And speaking for the council, we're very committed to active collaboration and finding a balance that continues to build the vibrancy of Yellow Springs. I mean, I thought it was kind of funny when I first ran for council. I was like, make Yellow Springs great again. Oh, wait. That's not a good slogan. But I do think that there is this level of volunteerism and involvement that is something that we can all embrace.
Thank you very much.
big subsystem changes like changing the HVAC are most likely going to affect lighting and plumbing and electrical this and all kinds of things. So it's stating the obvious, but you can't just pull that out and put it in. It's also going to be, it's going to be pricey, and I think it's important not to think that we can just, fix one thing, because it usually means tearing up 10 others to get to that one thing. And about 10 or so years ago, when I was on the PTO over at Mills Lawn in the high school, we were looking to redo the kitchen, and we just wanted to epoxy paint the floor and change a bowl table or two, and that was it. But we ran into Homeland Security and Department of Agriculture regulations requiring us, if we did too much of just the right kind of thing, to do things like put a cage around for security in the kitchen and lock it, and the wellness, and we had to have a wellness plan. So if the marching band we don't have wanted to sell candy bars, we have to also pay money to tell people not to eat them. So my point is, having worked with some of these things myself as an engineer for many years, it's not as simple as it seems to just fix the HVAC system and change this, and I think it's important for people to understand that. We're going to run into things that are going to be complicated and interwoven and expensive to do if we want to do some of the minor things, not to mention the major things.
That's a fair point, and that's one reason why our list of must-do items was shorter than any of us really wanted it to be. Carol, and then up here.
Thank you for letting me go again. This is more of a question where I'd like more information. There seems to be a tangled situation between declining birth rates, open enrollment, and affordable housing. And one thing I see that we tend to think of affordable housing as attracting young families. I haven't heard any data on that. We have a national declining birth rate, and we have lots of old people who want to move here. So I'd really like to see some statistics on that. And I'd like to see some statistics in that if we do have a declining birth rate, how that affects like this gentleman said, the footprint of the new school, our renovations to the school, because it might truly be schools that are shrinking.
Great, thank you.
And we should attend to that.
Thank you. There's one up here, Abby.
Hi, I'm Liz Robertson. I have a daughter here in Mills Lawn, and I'm excited about the methodology used here. It's nice to see that there'll be a process and a way to evaluate. I think my question is, what happens next? This is a task force. Who goes through the evaluation process of all these different items? Is there a overarching group that can look at multiple systems at once, or are you going to do, how do we go forward?
When we're done with all the questions, we do have next steps coming up. Here in the middle, Abby.
Hi, I'm Lauren Mikesell. My question is similar to Liz's as far as next steps, but I'm also curious, is there some type of timeline that you have? A lot of the things that need to be done, I think, have some sense of urgency to them. If the bathrooms aren't suitable, if there's leaking, some of these things are going to have to be attended to pretty quickly. But there's also a long list of things that need to be evaluated and getting estimates on what that will cost to make sure that it even makes sense to start with some of these maintenance.
As the gentleman there said, there are all these dependencies. I can say the timeline will be as quickly as possible, but that does not mean tomorrow or the next day, because this is legal. There are legal restrictions. There's just a lot of work involved here. So all I can say is as quickly as possible, but that does not mean tomorrow. Might not even mean next year. And if Terry, if you want to add anything to that.
I think as quickly as possible, but as you know, any type of, let's say the end result is going to the voters. That's a lengthy process. But I do want to assure you, your children can go to the restroom and not get wet.
They just don't like it. It's not dangerous.
We spend a lot of time on break fix, this continual cycle of break fix. So we are attending to those things, but it's not really an operational philosophy that we prefer.
Other questions or comments?
Hi, I'm TJ Turner. I'm one of the board members on the school board.
But also one of our task force members.
And also on the task force. And there's been a couple comments about school population, so I'd like to make a few comments. One is that there is a document that I found a couple weeks ago on the village website, and it was a survey done, looking broadly at our demographics in Yellow Springs. And we have consistently, over the last 10 years that document covered or so, been above the state average of households that have school-aged children. So we trend a percentage or 2 percentage points higher than the state average, and we've been there. So we're not decreasing in the number of households that have school-aged children. Also, the school district, in one of the annual meetings, we pull data and we show our enrollment data over the years. And if you look over the last 20 years, our enrollment data for in-district students fluctuates, but it is not trending downward in any significant fashion. So, at least want to put that to rest, that there is a rumor out there that we're getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and it's just not the case. The facts don't support that.
Thank you, TJ.
David Roach again. Just sort of to come back on the comment you made there. The report we got recently with the school grades going down could well affect the number of children that are coming here, because one of the reasons that we had a high rate was a lot of families would move to Yellow Springs for the schools, the same as they moved to Oakwood for the schools. Like in Oakwood, they move in. As soon as their last kid leaves the school, people are knocking on their door to buy their house because they know that they're moving back out. But we had a lot of people, because I do home inspections, so people are always talking. I hear them talking in schools, schools, schools. It's a big, big topic of conversation. So if we don't get our grades back up again, we'll definitely probably see a drop in enrollment, because people will not find Yellow Springs as desirable for their kids.
I guess just to tag on to all of that. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Sylvia Ellison. I have one student sort of still in the school system as a super senior at the Career Center, and I'm also on the school board. Tagging on to those points, people choosing to come here based on the attractiveness of the schools has a lot to do with the school curricular programming, but I also think over time, as our building decline stands in sharp contrast to buildings in neighboring districts, that will be another reason people stop coming here.
Thank you. Ready for next steps? Pointing this the right way. So we have two parts to the next steps. We have the task force responsibilities, and then we have the school board responsibilities. We as a task force are going to be collecting input from this meeting. As Abby said, we're looking at having some additional meetings, trying to collect that input, using that to determine what we finally make as recommendations to the school board. And our hope is in either January or February, we will make the formal recommendations to the school board. At that point, our responsibilities are concluded. The task force members have expressed an interest in continuing to work with the school board as this moves forward, given the amount of effort they've put in so far, wanting to make sure something comes to fruition. But our formal work as this task force is concluded at the time we make the recommendations to the school board. At that point in time, the school board has a lot on their plate. We're going to be having the public meetings about school funding, tax levies, and things like that. The Superintendent Holden is going to be conducting. But then the school board has to take a look at all the recommendations we've made and start saying, how do we do it? Do we do it all at once with the bond levy? Do we do it partly with bond levy, partly with pay as you go? How do we do that? But also, how do we figure out just what the size of this project is to make these different improvements? So they're going to be spending a lot of time trying to figure out how to implement the recommendations that we have made. They will then, when they have that figured out, prepare some budget estimates, share with the community to get feedback again, and adjust the plan as appropriate, and then move forward with a long-term funding plan, which may include a tax levy, which may include more than one tax levy. But as I said, this is as soon as possible, but there is a lot of work to go through before we're at the point where we can actually start construction on anything. Superintendent Holden is trying to make some improvements in some areas where we can. Again, she's working on security, she's looking at things we might be able to do for the kitchen, looking at other places as possible. But these building improvements that we need are bigger than a grant is going to address. So it is going to require some major funding to come back from the community back into the school.
Is there an email or someplace where people who leave this meeting can have further thoughts where they can add after they leave?
That is a brilliant idea. Thomas, can we set something up? What would the email address be? Questions at...
Facilities@ysschools.org.
Okay, facilities@ysschools.org. That actually goes to all of us on the task force. So we'll see what your ideas are and your questions are. Thank you, Kat. And then the last slide is merely, thank you so much for coming out here. We really appreciate your interest. We really appreciate your thoughtful questions and comments. This is great. As Kat suggested, if you have additional questions later, as we often do in the middle of the night, you wake up and say, oh yeah, please do let us know. We will be meeting as a task force again next Tuesday. We'll be working on the answers to the questions that you've raised, and we'll be putting a page on the Yellow Spring Schools website for the facilities. It'll have this presentation, it'll have the handout, it'll have these notes when we get them compiled, and it'll have the answers when we get those compiled as well. Stephanie?
There is already a facilities task force area on the website.
There is now, but we're going to have one of those pages be this public meeting information, which doesn't exist yet because we didn't have a public meeting yet. So thank you again. We really appreciate your coming out. And thank you for your acknowledgement of the hard work of the task force members. They really have put a lot of thinking, a lot of time into this, and it's been wonderful. And I want to thank you to our videographer. Who not only has taken the video, but he's going to edit it, and we're going to have that available on the website as well. So he's great job. Thank you so much.